Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of the Florida Food Policy Council's Food Dialogues. This is an occasional event that we do as part of our mission to explore issues related to policy in the food system and more generally policies as they relate to the economic system in the state and the environmental systems in the state. My name is Dell deChant. I'm the chair of the policy subcommittee of the council, and I also host these events as well as our monthly food forums. Tonight we have a very special topic and one of enormous importance to our community as a whole, to the state, our individual communities, and really to our own lives. The topic is titled The Intersectionality of Policy and Climate Change. We're happy to have with us three distinguished commentators on these topics. The first is Erica Hall. Erica is the chair of the Florida Food Policy Council, and we're fortunate to have her take time out of her busy schedule to be part of this event. Also with us is James Scott, who is leadership liaison of the Suncoast Sierra Club. And then finally, we have Sean Baraoidan. He is LEED Green Associate Project Associate for Ideal Building Consultants, and he's the chair of the Tampa Bay chapter of the US Green Building Council. We'll begin with a short introduction from each of our guests, and then we're going to tackle the idea of the issues that relate to climate change in a general sense. And then the real focus of our time together will be an engagement between the four of us on issues that relate to policy as it relates to climate change. So without further ado, I'm going to let our distinguished guests introduce themselves, beginning with Erica.
Good evening, and thank you all for having me. This is a very exciting topic, and I'm very excited to be here. My name is Erica Hall. I'm currently the chair of the Florida Food Policy Council, while also serving as vice chair of the Suncoast Sierra Club. My work is grounded in intersectionality between food systems and the environment, so I'm very excited to have my colleagues here with me today. Thank you, Dell.
Thank you, Erica. And now, James, if you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here and what brings you to this topic.
Yes, hello. So my name is James Scott. I'm a 12-year resident of St. Pete. I serve on the executive committee of the Suncoast Sierra Club, as well as the Florida chapter executive committee of the Sierra Club. My background is in environmental science and policy. I have an interest in sustainability and resiliency policy specifically, and especially how equity weaves into all of that, and kind of how we really look at policy not just through economic and environmental lenses, but really emphasizing the equity element, which I think has been lacking in sustainability and resiliency thinking and practice. So I look forward to delving into that.
Excellent. And I already sense significant overlap in terms of our areas of interests and our fields of expertise. Also a touch, I believe, of an interest in social justice, which is running through all of this. Next up is Sean. Sean, if you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here tonight and to this subject in general.
I'm Sean Baraoidan. Thanks so much for having me. As Dell said, I am the current chair of the Tampa Bay branch of the US Green Building Council. My day job, I am a sustainability consultant with Real Building Consultants, located in Tampa. We do green building design and certification. We do some district scale sustainability planning, as well as some energy modeling and other services. I attended USF for undergrad. I did environmental science and policy, and then also did my master's in urban and regional planning at USF. So I'm kind of mashing the two together, really interested in creating more sustainable communities, sustainable, resilient, healthy, equitable communities from both the design standpoint, the design of the built environment, as well as a policy standpoint.
Just as a point of note, my name is Dell deChant, and as I said, I'm the chair of the subcommittee on policy for the Florida Food Policy Council. I'm also associate chair of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of South Florida, and the convener of the University of South Florida Urban Food Sovereignty Group, which is working to bring to awareness of both the university, but indeed the broader Tampa Bay community, of the importance of food sovereignty and perhaps the distinction between food sovereignty and food security. So that may come up or it may not in our discussions, but that's kind of the platform that I'll be operating from. That being said, to get started, Erica, why don't you tell us a little bit about Florida Food Policy Council and what we're working on when it comes to climate change and climate issues and advocacy.
Yes, thank you, Dell. This topic was very important to me personally because my role takes me between these two worlds. We all know that food is a part of everything we do, and it's connected to our air, our water, our soil, our environment. And I just want to continue to engage in dialogue throughout the state to encourage people to understand that there is a connection between our earth and our food. And I think it's very important that we continue to have these dialogues to inform our communities, especially communities of color, who right now are suffering simultaneously from a pandemic, which is a health crisis, as well as an economic and racial and social injustice, all of that compounded with environmental racism in areas in our community. So it's so important for all of us in the sustainability world, the resiliency world, and the environmental justice world to work together to create an environment that is equitable for all of us. So for me and my role as vice chair of the Sierra Club, as well as my role as the chair of the Florida Food Policy Council, both of those worlds are extremely important to me. And one doesn't exist without the other for me. So as a person of color that's equally vested in my environment as well as in food, it's critical that I continue to engage in these dialogues and with my colleagues like James and Sean, who are both experts in their field, but they are also intersectional and they understand the need for intersectional environmentalism. So that's why it was very important that we have their voices and their views on why they do the work that they do and how it intersects with the work that they do with me.
I'll just put out there right now in terms of my own thinking that it seems that when it comes to ecology in general and activism in general, that it may be that intersectionality is an area that is underaddressed at this point. It seems to be an area that while some of us who are activists are aware of it, we're intentional about it, and yet nonetheless, it seems to be something that is not being activated as much as many other parts of environmental activism are. So that's just a quick thought on that. I want to go on now to James. So James, if you can tell us a little bit about the Sierra Club and what you think right now would be the best way to present the Sierra Club mission.
So the Sierra Club, the way that we look at climate policy and energy is our umbrella campaign is called Clean Energy for All. And implied in that campaign and that title is equity and thinking about energy through that lens. So on a national level, because you keep in mind the Sierra Club's got a national footprint, a state footprint, and then we have the local footprint. And serving on both the state and the local boards, I will say that on the state level, the elephant in the room is the legislature and preemption, and so there's a lot of bad bills circulating in Tallahassee. So, and I think this year is kind of unprecedented in what they're up to in terms of rolling back local climate policy. So there's a real urgent, pressing issue on the state level on how we look at, because the only real climate policy in Florida is happening on the local and regional levels. And so, protecting our right, for home rule, I think that's the main thing. And then locally, our climate work is within the Suncoast group is primarily focused on getting a commitment from Pinellas County government to transition its energy supply to renewables. The Ready for 100, our campaign to get local governments to adopt 100% goals, that really has been driving a lot of our climate policy work. And so I would almost say it's overly focused on governmental commitments on the local level. And what Tallahassee is doing is kind of indicating a weakness in that strategy, because if you don't have, within one swoop, Tallahassee could undo all of our local work this in the next month and a half. So state law, local commitments, and then obviously clean energy for all, looking at all that with through the lens of equity.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more with the undermining of home rule that's going on in the legislature. They've been very good at that for many years, but your observation that it seems to be accelerating in this session is right on the mark. It does seem that they've taken a particular interest in creating hurdles for local organizations, local municipalities, governments, and counties for taking action on climate change. So right on that. Sean, tell us a little bit about the Green Building Council and your approach to climate change and issues related to climate change from the standpoint of the council.
Yeah, so USGBC is the founder and the overseer of LEED, which is a green building rating system. It's the most widely used green building rating system in the world, actually. There's LEED buildings in over 150 countries, as well as in every single state, millions of square feet of certified green building space. So LEED is actually on its 4th version right now. So the ultimate goal of the creation of LEED was to transform the real estate market. And it's been doing that over time. So the first version of LEED, if we looked at it today compared to the 4th version, would look inconsequential. But the point of LEED was to help transition the market into these green building practices. You can't just throw everything at the market at once and expect them to be able to work it into their pro formas. You can't expect the industry and the manufacturers to know how to handle all of these best practice strategies. So over time, it's evolved and it's actually very stringent today. It goes far beyond simply energy and water efficiency, which is what a lot of people think of when they hear green buildings. It takes into account the site, how the site manages rainwater, how it interacts with the transportation system around it. It takes into account the materials that go into the building and the health of these materials. So USGBC, their slogan for a while has been green buildings for all. And that's number one, because obviously green buildings are better for the environment, right? We have to make drastic emissions reductions in a very short amount of time. And we need everyone to be living and operating in green buildings to do so, but also because green buildings are healthier buildings. Everyone deserves to live and work and play in a building that has the best indoor air quality, the best day lighting and views to the outdoors so that their mental health is enhanced. So that has historically been the USGBC's main focus, but actually as of the last couple years, USGBC has also come out with LEED for cities and communities. So, they have the green building sector locked down. They're the premier green building rating system. And now they're creating a standard for municipalities, whether it be cities, counties, or even universities or communities, to set metrics and compare themselves to peers and learn from each other. And actual cities and counties now are getting LEED certified under this new rating system, and it's catching on really quickly.
Sean, good observations all. I don't know if you have this information handy, but it might be interesting to the listeners. And do you know how many municipalities in the state actually have a certification as a green city?
Yeah, I don't have a number, but I know that pretty much every major Florida city is certified under LEED for cities or communities or pursuing certification right now, as well as so many other small municipalities, all the way from Atlantic Beach up in northern Florida to Miami Beach in South Florida. It's being used very widely, and Bank of America actually has been providing tons of grants. So shout out to Bank of America to really help in this endeavor. So USGBC has been working with them to provide assistance to these cities to help walk them through the process. It's a very lengthy process, and it involves collaboration across departments. It's very helpful when a city has a sustainability director to lead it, but that sustainability director will be meeting with everyone from the transportation department to the water department to Parks and Rec and everywhere in between to collect data and information and set goals for the future.
Yeah, that's great. Our little city of Newport Richey is pursuing certification as a green city, and so I'm very aware of the lengthy process. So yeah, there's no surprise in that to me. So as I listened to our presentations, here's what I heard. Here's what my takeaway was in terms of the urgent issues. From Erica, what I heard was intersectionality would be an area for our a particular interest. From James, I heard the challenge of preemption from the state. And from Sean, I heard a call for a commitment to green certifications, green building certification, green municipality certifications, because of the the tremendous importance to drastically reduce our emissions. Now, those are what the issues that I heard. So I'm going to open it up to the three of you to further comment on that. And did I get that right? Is that what you see as the primary issue before us, primary issues before us, or is there something more to say on it, or do you want to nuance it a little bit? It's open to everybody.
For me, yes. I know for both Sean and James, as well as myself, and you and I, Dell, policy is key and advocacy is key. So something that I would like to our listeners to learn, and I'm sure we'll get into that because we're all policy geeks here, but learning who the players are in your community when it comes to these policies around energy and advocacy and who the players are. I think the first step is key, is educating our communities to who the players are and how to start to advocate for themselves around policy and energy and climate change.
Yeah, I love that, Erica. A point well taken. That came up on our food forum last week. The most recent one we had. We got a caller that asked, "How can I get my city involved?" And there's a lot of answers to that. And the short answer I always give is the way to get your city involved is for you to get involved,
Right.
and also to become aware of how your municipal government works. If we're going to affect policy change, it's not going to be a lone wolf that goes up to the microphone and yells at the city council. You got to find out what the structures are that are in place and kind of figure out the way that particular municipality works. And there are similarities between all cities, but there's also enormous differences. So that's my take on it. James, Sean, further comments on the most pressing issues and what can be done.
So I totally agree with everything Erica said. In light of that, I'm gonna go another direction with it, just to not repeat what has already been said. I think one of our major, most challenging issues, especially in the U.S., is going to be fixing our transportation system. And there's so many far-reaching impacts of transportation that just are not talked about often. We know the obvious ones. Emissions from single occupancy vehicles are terrible for the environment, and that's being talked about. It's kind of being addressed with electric vehicles to an extent, but there's so many other implications of our transportation system. So environmentally, U.S. cities are notoriously designed around cars, which has resulted in an extremely inefficient use of land. So basically, if you drive anywhere around Florida, you're going to see massive parking lots. You're going to see tons of roads, and designing our cities this way, it's like a positive feedback loop. The more we build suburbs and sprawl, the more parking lots we need so that everyone can drive everywhere, which is going to lead to more sprawl because you can't build as densely if you need a parking lot in front of every single building. So that's one of the basic environmental impacts is just degradation of our environment through paving over everything. And then there's the health impacts of obviously pollution, how unsafe cars are, and then there's the social impacts of quality of life of living next to a highway, or driving by all these parking lots every day and just having a lack of greenery in our communities because we're so paved over. And then there's the cost of living impacts of transportation. Owning a car is expensive. And there's a couple US cities that have great public transit, have great safe bike lanes and pedestrian facilities, but majority of them do not, especially here in Florida. And it's a major cost impact to our families and our communities across Florida. And I'm going to tie it into food really quickly. That there's tons of food deserts all over Florida, and these tend to be low-income communities where a grocery store won't locate because of they don't meet income requirements for this community doesn't. And as a result, these low-income communities are also the communities that have the lowest car ownership. So they can't even drive outside of their community to go to a grocery store to get fresh food. So they're resorting to local convenience stores and eating junk food. So, this is where the Food Policy Council obviously comes into play, promoting urban agriculture and just better food policy to help support these types of communities.
So James, Scott, please, from your perspective, following up on what Sean has said, as well as Erica, or your own take on where we stand.
When I think about policy broadly, so not necessarily any specific policy, but building good policy. We know how far Florida lags behind on a lot of these areas, and so the Sierra Club, our theory of change for our energy work is based on the premise that if you get enough cities to make renewable commitments and enact local policies, that you're ultimately going to build a critical mass that's going to spill over onto the state level. Because our people often fail to get good policy through Tallahassee. And so how do we get there? How do we get to a place where, so local policy is one thing, but like the elephant in the room here where we really need to, start to win is on the state level. And a lot of the work that I do is not just policy advocacy, but it's politics. Who has power and how they think determines what kind of policy they create. So how do we create good policy? Well, we need to have it starts with the political culture and where people are at, and so we got to build bigger, more inclusive, diverse coalitions. I think that ultimately, you can have all the best policy ideas in the world, and you can have them maybe being effectively implemented in different localities across the state. But if at the end of the day, the legislature in Tallahassee's got their boot on our neck, we're not going to have the rate of change that is necessary. So building that good policy of all sorts is going to require, very savvy political advocacy in addition to the policy advocacy. And I would also, something else that comes to mind is kind of the political and policy crosswinds that we're about to navigate, where you've got Governor DeSantis and how he views the world and the kind of policies he believes in. And now you have the Biden administration and where they're coming from, and so you're going to see, I think especially if Congress does more, spending, the amount of policy change and investment that's going to be flooding across the country into these sorts of things, really has the potential to ramp up tremendously. And so for coalitions and communities to be tuned in and ready to rock and roll and to see where those dollars are coming from. And, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to sail with the Biden administration, and what they're going to do and the support they're going to provide. It's a lot of opportunity there. At the same time, we got a governor gearing up for a re-election next year, and again, he's not, always supportive of a lot of these initiatives. So how do we navigate those crosswinds? Build big coalitions, and I think picking very specific, important fights to fight together, choosing certain policy priorities and rallying the troops around them. That's how I think we build these coalitions. And so I guess to kind of kick the conversation forward, what are those, and to go back to intersectionality, what are those intersectional issues? Because food is such a great demonstration of intersectional, policy. It involved, climate and food and justice. There's just all these things that fit together. So issues like food, what are how can we rally people together to fight for food in a way that builds a lasting, powerful coalition that actually has the power to affect policy on the state level? I think that's long term where my head is at, is how do we win those political fights and those policy fights in Tallahassee?
Wonderfully said, James. You hit on a lot of key issues. Too many for me to engage each one of them at this moment. But the idea of coalition building, I think, is critical. I would like to just put out there, as we are thinking about coalition building, and I'm picking up on what James has just said, as we think about coalition building and bringing groups together, I am particularly interested in the marginalized. I'm particularly interested in both individuals and groups that are not part of an existing coalition and not able to really have a place at the table with the big girls and big boys. Those are the folks that, in terms of social justice, are the ones that are the most in need of being at the table and yet they're the ones that seem to have the greatest challenges in getting at the table. Those of us that are in positions of power and authority, either because of our involvements with important not-for-profit organizations or large institutional players like universities or government or for-profit corporations, I think it's incumbent upon us to make a place at the table for those who are otherwise marginalized and not part of the game. And I think that that's tough, because those of us that are in positions of power and authority and working in institutions that have power and authority, we're used to the way the game is played, and we're comfortable with our place at the table. And we tend not to give consideration to bringing others in, because we're more important in driving our agenda, driving our point forward. As good and helpful and important as our points may be, they are, to my mind, they are compromised if the rest of the community is not involved. Those are that are most directly and adversely affected by the policies that we would want to try to change and the better policies that we would want to enact. So that kind of like moves us down the road a little bit in terms of policy discussions. Erica, if you want to weigh in on that, then we can go to Sean as well for inputs directly on policy issues.
I think for us as an organization that is a council, as well as someone that helps to create and navigate policy and advocacy, I think it's key for us to continue to provide that safe place for groups to come and have these discussions, as well as create synergies with each other as to how they can come up with, as James said earlier, theories of change to fight these obstacles that we face at the state and local level. And groups like USGBC and the work that Sean is doing, and the work that we do at the Sierra Club, and the work we do at the council, I think the most important thing is relationships. And the evidence of that is my relationship with both Sean and James, which comes through our professional affiliations as well, as our common respect for each other, but our commitment to the work that we're doing at each of our levels organically kind of brought us together to come up with these theories of change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sure does. Makes a lot of sense. Sean, from the standpoint of the Green Building Council, what policies would you see as particularly effective, or would you want to perhaps enhance something that the rest of us has said?
Yeah, so there's, if I was president tomorrow, there's so many policies that, I would be talking about, but a couple from at least the standpoint of green buildings, and this is from the local level, we need more green building ordinances, whether that's mandated. So, certain cities have mandates where buildings of a certain size have to do some kind of green building certification and become certified. We can do green building incentives where developers can get maybe density bonuses so they could build taller. Maybe they can waive parking minimums, which would just have so many other benefits in exchange for doing more green building techniques. And this can also be done for affordable housing and should be done alongside green building. They should be paired together. And then there's also benchmarking policies, energy and water benchmarking policies that should be passed, which basically means just requiring buildings to track their energy and water use. And this is hugely important. There's a saying, you can't manage what you don't measure. So just by getting organizations to begin tracking their energy and water use and see what they're using month to month and year to year can really result in a lot of efficiency improvements, and it can help goal setting. You need a baseline to be able to set a goal, and we're seeing this across the state in cities that enact these type of benchmarking ordinances, that they're seeing huge savings in energy and water, and it provides a bragging point for these organizations, because they could say, we reduced our energy use by 10% this year, which is huge in the scheme of things.
And I mean, well, and to add to that, I'm not sure exactly what my point is, but I'm making it anyway. We've got the paradigm that we have, the way that like my professional career started at USF St. Pete, and I did the STARS baseline reporting, and data is so important, and having these tools and these goals But what at their heart, what these plans are supposed to do is unite people and bring people together and build public and political will around these things. And that hasn't really worked. I think if you look at a lot of, planning and a lot of government action, I'm a big believer in command and control policies. And, there's obviously things that we, can do now, but the long-term work of public education and public engagement and really building public, support around these things and actually truly inclusively engaging all the public stakeholders to come up with these good ideas. We're going to require a new paradigm. And those of us that have been stuck in our ivory towers and with our big institutions and organizations, I think that we're going to look back years from now and say, damn, we really missed the mark on X, Y, and Z. We really didn't see it the right way. Kind of like how we see things now. 10 years ago, we just didn't see things this way. And I think that for us to really try to accelerate that process and to really critique our own paradigm and to really think about the hard, long work of engaging the public in education, and then the goals and the measurements and the tools and the policies come after that. But if you put the policies, got to be a manifestation of genuine grassroots public support. And I don't think that we've ever really gotten really good at that. Very rarely is the public truly on board, and that's what we got to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that, you picked up the thread that I kind of left dangling in my remarks that I made. And I think the question before us is really, how do we shake up that paradigm? Most of us are in the positions that we're in because we're part of a meritocracy. We've been rewarded because for whatever reason, we're bright, we're talented, we're in the right place at the right time, we're the right ethnicity, we're the right background. We have all sorts of advantages that have come our way, and we're used to functioning in the environments where we're the ones with the advantage. So the question before us still, and I don't want to belabor this fact, but I want to make sure that it's in the recording that we're all thinking about it. How do we break out of that paradigm that has rewarded us so generously? One possibility, one way of at least beginning to break out of the paradigm is for all of us who are in positions of power and authority, for whatever reason we are, if we are here, can we take a step back and directly engage ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our physical presence in the lives of people who are definitely disadvantaged by the very system that we have benefited from? And I think there's ways to do that, but I think that they're very challenging for folks that are in these very positions that we're in. But I agree completely with you, James. I think we will be looking back. I'm looking back already at the last 10 years of my life and saying, what did I do? What could I have done more? And as we look forward, what can we do more beginning right now? So I'd welcome some more dialogue on this particular topic.
As you say that, part of it for me is empowering communities. And by doing that, I say mentoring them, nurturing them, leadership roles. Like, for example, in our group, we're working on initiatives around equity, inclusion, and justice, where we're empowering local leaders to step up and lead. And you've heard me mention that on our council calls. Who's the next generation of leaders? Who do we have that's been, trained and vetted and prepared by us, that's ready to step into that next role of leadership? So I think it starts there, and we have to start to develop these processes that develop these pipelines of leadership and mentoring, recruitment, retention. We have to look for the brightest and smartest next generation of leaders and get them ready.
I love that. I love that, Erica. And what you have just said is why you are such a tremendous leader, why you are the leader that you are, is because you see this, you understand this, and you're deeply engaged in it. I'm all for looking for the best and the brightest in the next generation. But to my mind, the next generation is all the best and the brightest, everyone in the upcoming generation, if they have but the opportunity to do that. And what you're doing, what you're talking about is tremendous. And I would say, would that there was more penetration of that into the deeper community? Would that there was more penetration of that vision into corporate America, into the university communities, into government itself? And again, just to refer back, the meritocracy, the system that we have in place, seems to me to be the greatest hurdle, the greatest challenge that we have to breaking through. But Sean, your thoughts on this?
But kind of going back to what you were saying about, looking back in time and seeing, how we used to treat things. Something I noticed consistently throughout studying urban planning is that the way they teach a lot of urban planning concepts is, this is how we used to do things. This is how we used to do public housing. This is how we used to plan for transportation. That was all wrong. This is how we're doing it now. And it's just consistent across every field of urban planning. So I think, step one is recognizing everything we've done wrong. I know it sounds like a cop-out answer to just say, the first step is recognizing it, like, then what? But it really, for so long, everyone on this webinar, we've all known it's existed, but the average person just doesn't, didn't know everything that has gone on behind the scenes in history. So many urban planning policies were completely rooted in racism, completely, like not even a little bit, just, the point of them was to be racist and to put down communities and to lift up others at the expense of certain communities. So I think, we're moving in the right direction, it seems. We're talking about it. A lot of cities are starting to change and to do some really good things in this sense.
Yeah, terrific, Sean. Thank you for that. And thank you, of course, Erica and James, for the good insights. Let's turn now to issues that regard the food system per se, and how climate change both affects the food system, and how the effects of climate change, as well as other shocks to the system that are occurring because of the environmental catastrophe that we are engaged in right now, or that we are experiencing right now. How is it that we as individuals, but also as representatives of important groups, can work to reform the food system in light of catastrophic climate change? There's no question that of all the effects of our industrial culture on the environment and climate, the industrial food system itself is one of the greatest contributors, not just to climate change, but to large-scale ecological catastrophe worldwide. The supply chains that are in place to ship food around the country, around the world, the average food item on your plate travels 1,500 miles. The amount of energy that's put into producing food in an industrial manner contributes directly to climate change and ecological devastation. The presence of genetically modified organisms in our food system contributes not only to ill health, but also to the destruction of naturally occurring plants and wildlife. The extreme use of pesticides on our food destroys natural ecosystem and seeps into the aquifer. Industrial agriculture is intensive in its use of fossil fuels, petroleum and petroleum byproducts, both in fertilizer, but also in the running of the giant farm machinery that occur around the world. I could go on in that regard. So we here at this table, with members of the Sierra Club and the Florida Food Policy Council and the Green Building Coalition, as we were discussing climate change and policy and what can be done, I think that some engagement with food policy is necessary for us to offer a holistic response. Erica, you had mentioned a resiliency document, I think, for the city of St. Petersburg. The Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council has been working on a resiliency plan. It came to the attention of the Pasco County Food Policy Council that resiliency plan was silent on food. It had a tremendous amount of information in it about resiliency in terms of seawater rise and hardening the infrastructure against sea level rise. But part of resiliency is resiliency of the food system. As long as we are dependent on an industrial food system, we're not very resilient against catastrophes. Eric, at the very beginning of our session tonight, you had mentioned the fragility of the industrial food system was revealed in part by the COVID crisis. And that's, with all due respect, is terrible. It's catastrophic as the COVID crisis has been. There are much more dire sorts of challenges that could well be heading our way right now. And if we had challenges, responding to the COVID crisis in terms of the food system, it does not speak well about the future, what the future may be like. So as we're here tonight and we're thinking about climate change and and food policy, what specific food policies might be enacted that could make a difference in terms of our response to climate change and the destruction of the ecosystems nationally as well as globally?
I think it's drilling down again to your local community. So it's things like composting, um, it's these alternative methods of feeding yourself, whether it's not just a urban garden or a community garden, but I've been going and speaking to groups, and there's groups doing so many innovative projects throughout the state of Florida, as well as throughout the country, like mobile produce vans and buses. You have churches that, and Dell, you and I, and you'll be working on a forum about food and faith and how the religious community has stepped up in lieu of the lack of government, intervention. And the Jewish community, the Islamic community, a lot of communities have stepped up and stepped into that role of convener and grower and a safe place for people to come and discuss how to grow food. Financing is key for me. I think the administration has to do a good job of putting the resources out there for groups like ours to access around financing and stacked financing, like the Healthy Food Financing Initiative and bonds and certain things that we can utilize, the low income housing tax credit, the new market tax credits. There's a lot of different programs that people are not utilizing that we can stack in order to create a package that would help us do better. That would just be where I could think of starting, is one, in the financing area and developing better vehicles for funding and financing, as well as promoting groups that are doing alternative methods of food, like a mobile bus or, a CSA, or groups that are not waiting for a grocery store to come and anchor themselves to become your economic anchor, but we have to be the economic anchors for our community. And that's also politically as well as, you know, economically. So for me, I think again, it goes back to that.
Yeah, I think that you hit on an important note when you mentioned the resources. There's a lot of resources that are floating around, many of which are not even acquired, not even
Right.
utilized by groups that could really use them. And I think, and just to offer a critique at this point, is the ability to access grants, the ability to access resources is challenging for many groups and certainly for many individuals. And the larger, more successful not-for-profits, as well as government agencies, they are like vacuum cleaners that come in and they suck up all the available resources, leaving smaller not-for-profits, religious communities, individuals, community groups at a disadvantage in competing for those resources. And I would argue that that would be a fundamental change that would be necessary if we really want to make a difference in reaching down to the grassroots, to reaching down to neighborhoods and smaller municipalities that lack the resources to effectively compete. And that's one of the challenges with our culture as it exists right now. I go back to the meritocracy point that I made before and to the large institutional power brokers within our society. Even if they are doing good, even if they are doing wonderful work, in a way, because of their very success and their ability to acquire resources from philanthropies, from the government itself, their very ability to do that marginalizes other groups and keeps them away from the table, and sometimes to the point where they just give up entirely. We can't be giving up any longer, and we can't be creating an environment in which people who have an opportunity to participate feel disenfranchised.
I think, ultimately we need to localize our food systems, whether that be through community gardens or urban farms or any other type of urban agriculture. City of Tampa has a community garden ordinance that allows you to create community gardens within certain zoning districts, residential, office, industrial, or residential, office, commercial, but you're not allowed to sell the produce from the community garden unless you're in a commercial zoning district. which really doesn't make sense. There's no reason why a community garden in the middle of a neighborhood shouldn't be able to, sell some produce to its residents to, number one, provide them, greater access to fresh food, and number two, provide funds to the community garden to continue functioning. And then on top of that, the city of Tampa, and I just speak from the city of Tampa's perspective because that's what I know best, that's where I am. We don't have a local food ordinance for urban farms to be able to exist. So you can't create an urban farm within the city of Tampa. You can create a community garden. And we actually recently got our first urban farm within the city of Tampa behind Encore, which is a mixed income housing complex run by the Tampa Housing Authority. And that was actually kind of a fluke, to be honest, because they did a PD, which is a planned development, and they kind of slipped the language in there to be able to do an urban farm someday. And, the day came where they were ready to create one, and the city of Tampa didn't know how to permit it. They didn't really know how to do it. And it took them 2 years to get this farm up and running. They finally are up and running. Shout out to Meacham Urban Farm in downtown Tampa. Go check it out if you're in the area. But we really can't replicate that across the city because just the zoning doesn't allow for it, that the code doesn't allow for it. And they were, this Meacham Urban Farm was lucky enough to have the support of the housing authority behind them. So they were able to get it done. But, the average person doesn't have that. And localizing our food system like this, it's better for our health. It's better for our economy. It keeps so much more money in our local communities. And we could have a network of community gardens across our communities that are training our future farmers to be, the next urban farmers in our communities. It should all be working together.
Absolutely. Well said, Sean. I'm very aware of that. Erica and James, if you want to weigh in on that and what's going on in St. Petersburg with urban farming.
I'm sure Erica knows more than I do. I do know that we are innovative, and St. Pete does, is often ahead of the curve on these sorts of things. And there is some really cool work going on. I believe we recently passed an ordinance where you can now sell food that you grow, from home. And there's a lot more momentum behind that. So, Erica, if you want to speak to anything else in terms of innovative policy, I would like to make a statement about something that I guess broader context, but before I do that, specifics.
But no, you all hit on it, and Sean said something key. And again, it takes me back to the policy thing, that how can you change policy if you don't know policy? So again, that goes back to that point. And the reason why we were able to attack it is because we found out that there was a zoning code that would not allow you could grow it, but you couldn't sell it. So the point was made, we're in a pandemic, this is an economic crisis. It would make sense for people not just to be able to grow it and feed themselves, but also to grow it and sell the produce to create an income for themselves. So that was a sticking point for us. And it made sense because of the demographics, because of the neighborhoods where this was happening, that people had lost their job. We did a light scan of certain communities, and we saw that most of those communities that were affected by the obstacle of not being able to sell the produce were people in the CRA and in South St. Pete and in areas that were primarily communities of color lived in. So it was important that we made that point to the city council, that not just should we be able to grow the produce, but residents should be allowed to sell it. So we worked in conjunction with the state on that. So again, Dell, as we always talk about, it's a clear connection where policy on a local level connects to the state level, and eventually it goes up to the federal level. So that's where the synergy between all levels is key, and the communication needs to stay open between all levels so that everyone's always aware that these policies are there and what needs to be done to remove those obstacles.
Beautifully said, Eric. I'm going to let James come in on some general comments about it. But before leaving this particular topic, since this is an informational forum that we're working on and others will be watching it, I would strongly encourage anyone that is interested in taking the initiative to establish policy in your own community to consult the ordinance for the city of St. Petersburg, or the city of Newport Richey or Pasco County and consult their urban agriculture ordinances. Those are near models. I think all of them have, all of them could be better. I'll just say that. All of them could be
Right.
better. But right now, if there is none in existence where you live, consult the general codes, find it for Newport Richey, City of St. Petersburg, or Pasco County, and you'll get a model code that will allow urban gardening in your community, and also some of the amenities that go along with it, such as the opportunity to sell the food that you're growing. That would be a tremendous improvement in many communities if you could do, including Sean, the city of Tampa.
Yes.
You know,
And before I let James get a little more into this, one thing I wanted to mention too is around community benefits agreements. We are in the middle of one here in the city of St. Pete. And as you all know, a CBA is key in making sure that when the developers come in to develop land or property, that the community, one, gets to work on those projects, and two, they get to reap some of the benefits that come from those projects. So another local thing, Dell, is community benefits agreement, and that's key as well as a tool for equitable distribution. And I'll let James touch a little bit more on that.
Yeah, like, and I'm not really sure in terms of community benefit agreements. I mean, that's I think one of there's a whole, like, there's so many tools and there's a lot of policies out there and a lot of ways to get to where we need to be. But this kind of goes to my broader point is, and this is kind of might give you a hint to my politics here, but the industry structurally is broken. The energy industry, big oil, is going to drive our world into oblivion if we do not fundamentally restructure it. Same thing with the big banks and finance. The food industry has got to be radically reformed on a federal level, and ultimately, until we do that, we can make all the progress. And it's important that we make local progress. That's how we've got to do something, and we've got to make progress. But at the end of the day, we're going to have radical change. And what we're discussing now is I think the beginning of the journey to make that happen. I would also say, the importance of planning. We need very clear goals. The way we do benchmarking for buildings or for comprehensive plans, having very clear measurable goals about what are we trying to accomplish when it comes to food. And whether it's a local plan, a regional plan, county plan, state plan, being really clear about what we're measuring and then very carefully tracking that data and having all of our policy making be driven by those metrics and by those goals. I think that's, again, so coming at this as an energy guy with a mind toward policy, that's how I see this.
Excellent, James. When we think about comprehensive plans, regional plans, municipal plans, ask yourself if you're in a position, or ask the government if you're in a position to do so, is the food system included in that regional plan? In most cases, it is not. The parts that are included are things such as power, transportation, security, police, fire, and the like. Where's the food? And in any municipal government, ask yourself if there is an agrarian director on the city staff or an agricultural director on the city staff. We have a chief of police, we have fire, we have parks and rec, we have public works, we have city administration, we have planning and zoning. We have all of these other branches of municipal government, but there's no branch that's dedicated to urban food production. I would just argue that that should be a part of every city government. It should be a part of every regional plan. It should be a part of every state plan, is to include that element in the planning, include that element in the budget. And again, we who are doing this event tonight, and those that may be listening to it in the future, we're the ones that are in the position to advocate for that. We have the profile, we have the power, and we represent organizations that carry a tremendous amount of power with them. It's time for us to be able to do something, because as we all have said tonight, in one way or another, time is running out. Time is running out, and now's the time to act. So let's go ahead and close with final comments about maybe if you could, each of us in a few words, observe where we are right now and where we're going and how we can get there.
Yes, I have hope. I'm hopeful. Let me start with that. I'm very hopeful. For me, again, equity is important. I lead the EIJ task force of the Sierra Club, and James and I work on that. For me, the Sierra Club is hope for me to see a 127 plus year old organization created by white supremacists that have now owned their history and want to be better and want to do better. So for me, that's leadership. And that's how you lead. And that's how you step up and lead, where you acknowledge the wrongs of the past and you take the steps to create a better future. And as I develop relationships throughout the state, I'm so hopeful of the groups that are out there. And without all of you, I couldn't do what I do. So let me just give you all your flowers now and just thank everybody for what they do. And thank you all for continuing to motivate me and inspire me to continue to do what I do.
Again, I'm coming at this conversation not as a food expert, but being tuned into the environmental movement, if you will, and seeing the food issue. I never had really leaned into the food issue since I met Erica. She's like kind of enlightened me a little bit, if you will, and so really seeing the food movement. You have, it's kind of like you have energy, and you have waste, and you have different areas in the environmental movement that are kind of coming into their own and that are kind of blossoming and growing up. I think food as an issue, as a movement, is having a moment, and to really galvanize that and to make it real and to make it sustainable. I think is going to take number one, definitely leadership. That's key, and having vision and having people skills and the ability to convene and to plan and to work together. But ultimately, once that leadership happens and those coalitions come together, really good policy is going to come from really good analysis and really good planning. Now we've got to be very serious and surgical, but often the folks who are good with the planning and the analysis and the policy are often nerdy and not great at stakeholder engagement, and often are stuck in ivory towers. So how do we combine leadership and grassroots organizing with solid planning analysis and policy making? I'm not sure how that all works out, but I think that there's this moment in the food movement is really promising. So the hard work is ahead, but I think if we try to combine all those different things together, that's how we'll make magic and ultimately get to that big widespread federal change that I think we need.
I'll just say I'm also really hopeful these days, a lot more hopeful than I have been in a long time. Everything that I learned about in planning school, I'm seeing come to fruition in communities across the country, and even at home in Tampa Bay. We're seeing protected bike lanes being created. We're seeing complete street projects where lanes are being taken away from cars and sidewalks are being extended and safe bike lanes are being created. We're seeing, Enoch Davis Youth Farm in St. Pete, thanks to the work of people like Erica. We have cities committing to 100% renewable energy, thanks to James and the Sierra Club. So there's a lot of good happening. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it's happening quick enough, which I agree with. We have a deadline, really, thanks to the the UN IPCC report. That's approaching very quickly, but every day there's good things happening. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
Excellent, and I'm hopeful too. We are in challenging times right now, and we're all aware of it. What's encouraging to me is that in the face of the challenges that we're facing, folks like us, as well as those that share our vision and are part of our community, rather than giving up, rather than washing our hands and stepping away from the challenge, we're digging right in. We're like the firefighter or the law enforcement officer. When we see challenge, we go to the challenge rather than running away from it. And what each of us have said tonight should be encouraging to all that are listening to us. And the one last remark that I would make is, to the degree that you possibly can, who are listening to this broadcast or watching it in the videotape, to the degree that you possibly can, join with others to make your voice louder and to make your work stronger. Join with others. We are stronger if we do it together. We are stronger if we share the vision. We are stronger if we work as a united front. And that would be my concluding remark for tonight. I thank you all for being here. I thank our special guests, Erica, James, and Sean, for taking time out of your busy schedule. And I thank all of you who are listening to this broadcast or listening to this tape in one way or another to tell others about this, to share the recording. It will be on the Florida Food Policy Council website. And to the degree that you possibly can, join the Florida Food Policy Council. Your membership is important to us. And if you can see your way clear to make a donation, that would be gratefully received. We are a not-for-profit organization that's dedicated to the food system of Florida, making it better, richer, more resilient, and more equitable. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you all for being part of the Florida Food Policy Council.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.